I saw her in her house on her treadmill, and I noticed she wasn't there Thursday. So I got in the house, look around through the back patio door while she was sleeping. So I woke her up. Well, so I raped her in her house, and then I took her to the car and took her to Tweed. Spent the day in Tweed, and then I hit her as we were walking. She thought we were leaving. Hit her on the back of the head. Her skull gave way. She was immediately unconscious. And I strangled her.
Picture the most trusted person in the military, a decorated colonel who flies prime ministers and royalty, commands Canada's largest air base, and has access to the nation's most classified secrets. Now imagine discovering that this same man has been breaking into homes to steal women's underwear, raping subordinates, and brutally murdering innocent women. Meet Colonel Russell Williams, a man whose double life was so shocking it brought the Canadian military to its knees and redefined what we thought we knew about hidden evil. This case will make you question everyone you trust. You're about to hear how one of Canada's most decorated military officers systematically escalated from panty thief to serial rapist to cold-blooded killer, all while maintaining a facade of honor and respectability. But this story doesn't just end with his crimes, it reveals one of the most masterful police interrogations ever recorded, where a detective slowly dismantled the psychological armor of a military commander and exposed the monster beneath. Stay with me because this case proves that the most dangerous predators often hide behind the most trusted uniforms. David Russell Williams seemed destined for greatness from the moment he decided to serve his country. Born on March 7, 1963, in Bromsgrove, Worcestershire, England, Williams immigrated to Canada with his family as a child and quickly embraced his new homeland with the kind of patriotic fervor that would define his entire adult life. At the University of Toronto Scarborough, Williams excelled in economics and political science, but it was clear that his true passion lay in serving Canada. He joined the Canadian Forces with the kind of dedication and natural leadership ability that military instructors dream of finding in their recruits. From the beginning, Williams stood out not just for his intelligence and discipline, but for his genuine commitment to the values that the military represents: honor, duty, and protection of the innocent. Williams rose through the ranks with remarkable speed, earning respect from superiors and subordinates alike. He became a pilot, and not just any pilot, he was entrusted with flying VIP aircraft for dignitaries, heads of state, and even members of the royal family. This wasn't just a job, it was one of the highest honors the Canadian military could bestow, requiring absolute trust and impeccable character. By 2009, Williams had achieved what many would consider the pinnacle of a military career. He was appointed commander of CFB Trenton, Canada's largest military airbase and a critical hub for the nation's defense operations. This position meant that Williams was responsible for thousands of military personnel and their families, overseeing operations that were vital to national security, and serving as a role model for the next generation of Canadian military leaders. To everyone who knew him professionally, Williams embodied everything that was noble about military service. He was disciplined, intelligent, dedicated, and seemed to genuinely care about the welfare of those under his command. Colleagues described him as a straight arrow, someone you could trust with your life, your secrets, and your family's safety. His military record was spotless, his evaluations were outstanding, and his future seemed unlimited. But behind this facade of military excellence, Russell Williams was living a secret life that would shock even experienced investigators when it was finally exposed. What nobody knew was that as early as 2007, while Williams was building his sterling military reputation, he had begun engaging in behavior that would eventually escalate into some of the most heinous crimes in Canadian history. It started, as many such cases do, with what seemed like relatively minor transgressions that fed a growing compulsion he couldn't control. Williams began breaking into homes in the Ottawa area, initially focusing on stealing women's underwear. These weren't random break-ins motivated by financial desperation or opportunistic theft. They were carefully planned operations that revealed a disturbing psychological profile. Williams would study his targets, learn their routines, and break in when he was confident they wouldn't be home. But the theft wasn't the end goal, it was just the beginning. According to evidence later presented in court, Williams would spread out the stolen underwear on his victims' beds, photograph it in elaborate arrangements, and then dress himself in bras and panties while masturbating on their beds. He documented these activities with thousands of photos and videos, creating a disturbing catalog of his escalating obsession. The psychological implications of this behavior are staggering. Here was a man entrusted with national security, someone who had access to classified information and commanded respect from thousands of subordinates, engaging in behavior that revealed deep-seated issues with power, control, and sexual deviance. The fact that he was doing this in the homes of unsuspecting victims, violating their most private spaces while they were unaware, demonstrated a complete lack of empathy and respect for others' boundaries. Between 2007 and 2010, Williams committed 82 documented burglaries, stealing approximately 1,400 pieces of clothing, most of it women's underwear. He was methodical in his approach, keeping detailed records and carefully organizing his collection. When police eventually searched his home, they found the stolen items neatly stored, cataloged, and concealed with the kind of organizational skills you'd expect from a military officer. By 2009, Williams' compulsive behavior was no longer satisfied by break-ins and theft. Like many sexual predators, his need for control and domination had grown, and he began looking for more direct contact with victims. The psychological literature on sexual offenders often describes this kind of escalation, where fantasy and indirect contact no longer provide sufficient gratification, leading to increasingly dangerous behavior. In September 2009, Williams crossed a line from which there would be no return. He began attacking women in their homes, moving from theft to sexual assault. His first known assault victim was attacked in her home near Tweed, Ontario, the same community where Williams had a cottage and had been conducting many of his break-ins. The attack followed a pattern that would become Williams' signature. He would break in while his victims were sleeping, bind and blindfold them with duct tape, and then sexually assault them. But even more disturbing was his need to document everything. Williams photographed and videotaped his assaults, creating evidence that would later be crucial in his prosecution but also revealing the depth of his psychological pathology. A few days later, he struck again in the same area, attacking another woman in her home. The similarities between the attacks were clear to investigators: the same methods of entry, the same use of restraints, the same pattern of behavior. But what they didn't yet realize was that they were dealing with someone with military training, someone who understood surveillance, operational planning, and evidence management. On November 25, 2009, Williams' escalating violence reached its ultimate conclusion when he committed his first murder. The victim was Corporal Marie France Comeau, a 38-year-old member of the Canadian Forces who was stationed at CFB Trenton Williams' own base. This wasn't a random victim. This was a subordinate, someone under his ultimate command, someone who trusted him as her commanding officer. The psychological significance of this choice cannot be overstated. Williams wasn't just killing a stranger. He was betraying the fundamental trust that exists between a military commander and his subordinates. Marie France Comeau had sworn to serve her country under Williams' leadership, and he repaid that loyalty by breaking into her home and brutally ending her life. According to the detailed confession Williams would later provide, he broke into Comeau's Brighton, Ontario home and waited in the basement for her to return from work. When she arrived home, he attacked her, bound her with duct tape, and sexually assaulted her. But unlike his previous victims who survived, Williams killed Comeau, suffocating her with duct tape. True to his disturbing pattern, Williams documented the entire crime with photographs and video. He spent hours in Comeau's home after her death, taking pictures of himself wearing her underwear and posed with her body. The level of depravity demonstrated by this behavior shocked even experienced investigators who had seen the worst of human evil. The murder of Marie France Comeau represented a complete betrayal of everything Williams claimed to stand for as a military officer. He had violated his oath to protect those under his command in the most heinous way imaginable, transforming from protector to predator in a way that would shake the Canadian military to its core. 2 months later, in late January 2010, Williams killed again. This time his victim was Jessica Lloyd, a 27-year-old woman from Belleville, Ontario, who had no connection to the military or to Williams personally. She was simply an innocent young woman who had the misfortune to live in an area where Williams was hunting for victims. Williams broke into Lloyd's home, bound and blindfolded her with duct tape and kidnapped her. Unlike his previous attacks, he didn't assault and kill her in her own home. Instead, he brought her to his cottage in Tweed, where he could take his time without fear of interruption. 4 hours, Williams tortured, sexually assaulted, and photographed Jessica Lloyd before finally killing her. The evidence later presented in court showed that Lloyd begged for her life, pleaded with Williams to let her go, and promised not to identify him if he would just spare her. But Williams showed no mercy, no compassion, and no recognition of her humanity. After killing Lloyd, Williams disposed of her body in a wooded area and attempted to clean up the evidence at his cottage. But he had made mistakes, leaving tire tracks at Lloyd's home, boot prints in the snow, and other forensic evidence that would eventually lead investigators to his door. Jessica Lloyd's disappearance triggered a massive police investigation led by the Ontario Provincial Police. Lloyd had failed to show up for work, and her family immediately knew something was wrong. When police found evidence of a break-in at her home, including tire tracks and boot prints in the snow, they knew they were dealing with a kidnapping that would likely end in murder. The investigation was methodical and thorough, with police canvassing the area, interviewing residents, and analyzing every piece of physical evidence they could find. The tire tracks were particularly significant. They showed an unusual tread pattern that could potentially be traced to a specific vehicle. As the investigation expanded, police began to see connections to other unsolved cases in the area. The break-ins, the sexual assaults, and now the disappearance of Jessica Lloyd all seemed to be connected. They were dealing with a serial offender who was escalating in violence. The breakthrough came when investigators were able to trace the tire tracks found at Lloyd's home. The unusual tread pattern led them to identify specific vehicles in the area, and one of those vehicles belonged to Colonel Russell Williams. When they ran Williams' name through their databases, they discovered he lived in the area where many of the break-ins had occurred and had access to areas where other crimes had taken place. On February 7, 2010, Russell Williams was called in for what he believed was a routine interview to help with the investigation. He had no idea that he was actually the prime suspect, and investigators had already gathered significant evidence linking him to the crimes. The interrogation of Russell Williams, conducted by OPP Detective Inspector Jim Smyth, would become one of the most famous police interviews in Canadian history. Over the course of 10 hours, Smyth methodically broke down Williams' defenses and obtained a full confession to murder, sexual assault, and dozens of break-ins. The interrogation began with Smyth presenting Williams with the physical evidence, tire tracks that matched his vehicle, boot prints that matched his footwear, and other forensic connections to the crime scenes. Initially, Williams tried to maintain his innocence, suggesting there might be innocent explanations for the evidence. But Smyth was masterful in his approach. He didn't confront Williams aggressively or try to browbeat him into confessing. Instead, he methodically presented evidence, allowed Williams to offer explanations, and then calmly showed why those explanations didn't hold up. Gradually, Williams began to realize that the evidence against him was overwhelming. The turning point came when Smyth presented Williams with boot prints from Jessica Lloyd's home that were an exact match to Williams' footwear. Faced with this undeniable physical evidence, Williams finally began to crack. What followed was one of the most detailed and disturbing confessions in criminal history. Williams didn't just admit to the murders of Marie France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd. He provided investigators with a complete catalog of his crimes going back years. Williams confessed to 82 break-ins and thefts, detailing his method of selecting victims, studying their routines, and entering their homes to steal underwear. He described his compulsive need to photograph himself wearing the stolen items and his escalation from theft to sexual assault to murder. The level of detail Williams provided was extraordinary. He told investigators where to find hidden evidence at his home and cottage, including thousands of photographs and videos documenting his crimes. He described the locations where he had disposed of evidence and provided information that allowed police to recover items that definitively linked him to unsolved cases. Perhaps most disturbing was Williams' matter-of-fact demeanor during the confession. He showed no emotion, no remorse, and no recognition of the horror he had inflicted on his victims and their families. He described brutal assaults and murders with the same calm, methodical approach he had used throughout his military career. Williams also revealed the psychological motivation behind his crimes, admitting that he believed he would have continued escalating his behavior if he hadn't been caught. He told investigators that he couldn't stop himself, that the compulsion had become too strong to resist. When police searched Williams' homes in Ottawa and his cottage in Tweed, they discovered a treasure trove of evidence that confirmed every detail of his confession. Hidden in his basement were boxes containing the 1,400 pieces of stolen underwear, carefully organized and cataloged with the kind of systematic approach you'd expect from a military officer. More disturbing were the thousands of photographs and hours of video Williams had taken documenting his crimes. These images showed Williams wearing stolen underwear while masturbating on his victims' beds, posed with the bodies of his murder victims, and engaging in the sexual assaults that had terrorized communities across eastern Ontario. The photographic evidence also revealed the calculated nature of Williams' crimes. These weren't crimes of passion or opportunity. They were carefully planned operations that Williams documented with the thoroughness of a military mission. He had created detailed records of his crimes, almost as if he was proud of what he had accomplished. The revelation that one of Canada's most trusted military officers was a serial rapist and murderer sent shockwaves through the Canadian forces and the nation as a whole. This wasn't just any military member. This was a colonel who had commanded thousands of personnel and had been entrusted with flying VIPs, including members of government and royalty. The military moved quickly to distance itself from Williams and to begin the process of erasing him from their history. His uniform was burned, his commission was revoked, and his military decorations were stripped away. The very symbols of honor and service that Williams had worn were destroyed to prevent them from ever being associated with his crimes again. But the damage to the military's reputation was severe. Questions were raised about how such a dangerous individual could have risen to such a high rank without anyone detecting his psychological problems. The military was forced to examine its screening processes, its support systems for personnel, and its procedures for monitoring the mental health and behavior of its members. On October 18, 2010, Russell Williams appeared in court and pleaded guilty to all 88 charges against him, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts each of sexual assault and forcible confinement, and 82 counts of breaking and entering. The decision to plead guilty spared his victims' families the trauma of a lengthy trial, but it also meant that many details of his crimes would never be fully explored in open court. During the sentencing hearing, the court heard victim impact statements from the families of Marie France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd, as well as from the women who survived his sexual assaults. The pain and trauma Williams had inflicted was evident in every word, as family members described how his crimes had destroyed their sense of safety and their trust in the institutions meant to protect them. Judge Robert Scott sentenced Williams to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years on each murder count, to be served concurrently. He also received concurrent sentences for the other charges. The judge's comments emphasized the betrayal of trust that Williams' crimes represented, noting that as a military officer, he had been entrusted with protecting the very people he victimized. The Williams case had far-reaching consequences beyond the criminal justice system. The Canadian military underwent significant reforms in its screening and monitoring procedures, implementing new systems to identify personnel who might be struggling with psychological issues before they became dangerous. The case also highlighted the importance of recognizing escalating patterns of criminal behavior. Williams' progression from break-ins to theft to sexual assault to murder followed a predictable pattern that criminologists had identified in other serial offenders. The tragedy was that this escalation could potentially have been interrupted if the earlier crimes had been solved and connected. For the victims who survived Williams' attacks, the revelation of his true identity added another layer of trauma. They had been assaulted by someone who represented authority and protection in Canadian society. The trust that citizens place in their military and law enforcement had been violated in the most personal and brutal way. Russell Williams is currently serving his life sentence at Port Cartier Institution, a maximum security federal penitentiary in Quebec. He will not be eligible for parole until 2035, when he will be 72 years old. Given the nature of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse, it's unlikely he will ever be released. The case continues to fascinate criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement professionals because of the stark contrast between Williams' public persona and his private behavior. How does someone live such a complete double life? How do they compartmentalize their existence so effectively that even those closest to them have no idea of their true nature? The Williams case also serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most respected facades. The uniform, the rank, the decorations, and the public service record meant nothing when weighed against the horror Williams inflicted on innocent victims. His crimes stripped away any honor he might have earned through his military service and revealed him for what he truly was, a predator who used his position of trust to access and victimize the vulnerable. The interrogation video of Williams' confession continues to be studied by law enforcement agencies around the world as an example of masterful police work. Detective Inspector Jim Smyth's patient, methodical approach demonstrated how proper interrogation techniques can break down even the most controlled and disciplined suspects. The Russell Williams case represents one of the most shocking betrayals of trust in Canadian history. A man who had sworn to serve and protect instead became a predator who terrorized communities and murdered innocent women. His crimes revealed that the most dangerous individuals are often those who hide behind uniforms, titles, and reputations that grant them access to victims and protection from suspicion. Williams' methodical documentation of his crimes provides a disturbing window into the mind of a serial offender, showing how fantasy can escalate into reality and how compulsive behavior can override even the strongest professional and personal obligations. His case serves as a reminder that evil can lurk behind any facade and that we must remain vigilant in protecting ourselves and our communities from those who would exploit our trust. The courage of his survivors, the dedication of the investigators who brought him to justice, and the resilience of the military institution that expelled him all demonstrate that while evil may hide for a time, truth and justice will ultimately prevail. Russell Williams may have betrayed everything he claimed to represent, but the system that caught him and the people who survived him prove that honor, courage, and integrity are more than just words. They are the values that define us and protect us from monsters like him.